Welcome to PJNet Live. It's Tuesday night, and PJNet is off to a great start this week, as you will see in just a few moments. Remember, at the bottom of the hour, we have a special edition of Del Didway coming your way. That will be tonight. And tomorrow night, we have a new guest, first time, Amanda Flynn. And, of course, our regular Michelle Medlock Adams Wednesday night. Speaking of first-time guests, we have standing by in our green room an incredible story of faith, an incredible story of overcoming adversity, an incredible story of beating the odds, an incredible story of hope. And I don't want to tell the story. Now, I have met Tammi before, kinda, okay? But let's introduce her for the first time here on PJNet Live. Tammi, you look gorgeous, girl. How you doing?
I'm doing well, Mark. Thanks for having me. How you doing?
Oh, whenever I'm doing this, I am doing so fine. I live for this. Several months ago, we were speaking by telephone. I forget what the occasion was. I'm sure it was something having to do with Christianity or conservative politics or some combination thereof.
It was first come before, and then it was politics regarding Mr. Brian Peoples, who was running for Senate in Alabama.
Right. There you go. And but somehow you were, in our conversation, you shared part of your testimony, and I was very moved at that time. But since then, I've seen you on Facebook posting this, that, and the other, and you just look like a bundle of joy. But it has not always been thus, has it?
No, sir. No, it hasn't. It hasn't. I just, going way back to my elementary years, I could remember as far as 5 years old when my mom, I remember her being the most gorgeous thing ever. And I do get my looks from my mother. So,
oh, I see. Yeah. Okay.
How gorgeous she was in her prime. And so she had me at an early age of 15. When she was 15. And I just remember 5 years old that my mom was the prettiest thing ever. And then things took a turn for the worst in her life. It was during the 80s. I was born 1980. So it was during the drug epidemic in New York, Brooklyn, New York. And she was high strung on heroin and also crack cocaine. And I was her firstborn, and she kept having babies after babies after babies. So I'm the oldest out of 5 children.
And you have memories going all the way back to 5 years old with your mother.
Exactly. So I remember telling my brothers and my siblings, rather, that I remember my mother. I probably was the only one to remember her sober, her in her right mind. And because they knew only a drug addicted mother up until their teenage years of them turning 20, that's when she decided to get clean. But throughout that time of my mom battling drug addiction, she was in an abusive relationship. I watched my mom get her butt whooped so many times by different men. And I couldn't understand why, she would have herself in a situation like this. I mean, it was traumatizing as a kid. I come to find out as well, that in my family, there's this thing called a generational curse. And I didn't understand what that was till later on in my life. But I realized that when I was 7 years old, my mother's brother had molested me at a very young age. And it was like a turn of events in my life where I really didn't feel safe anymore in the home that we lived there. My mom was a drug addict, and so my uncle, they were like partners in crime and doing drugs together. So, I didn't feel safe in my own home. And so when I actually told my mom, I think she already knew what happened, because I later found out that the same thing happened to my mom when she was little. And then the same thing happened to her own mother when her mother was 14. I mean, it was just an ongoing thing.
It sounds bad, but in the article that was in AL.com, there's a lot of details in there that are just almost horrific. You grew up basically. You were the mom to your younger siblings in many ways.
That is correct. If because my mom, we were taken into the system, Child Protective Services, because she wasn't taking care of us. I think neighbors were calling the Child Protective Services because we were not being taken care of. And so we went on to move with my grandmother. Before we moved with my grandmother, it was really, really bad. I was if I went to school, my siblings didn't eat, and I was around 14 years old at this time where my mom was just really, really bad. She would sleep all day. I would have to bathe the children, wash the clothing. I had to do everything like a mom, which I grew up faster and never had a childhood at all. Um, as I stated, my uncle, he also too had was raping and molesting a young lady who lived in the same apartment building that we lived in, which led to his arrest for someone else's abuse. And while he was in prison, he had met a new wife, had children with her. Later on, we find out that he was actually raping and molesting his own children. And so I just really, when I realized that my uncle was remarried, I had called his wife. I didn't even know who she was, but I had a dream about two little girls in my dream about her the same age of his children, and I tried to find a number to I guess his new home, his new wife, and try to alert her of what the dream that I had, and I knew it was his family. And so when I told her, I think she already knew, but she didn't know how to confront him. But long down the road, she did confront him, and he held his family at knife point for 2 days straight. And that's why he's in prison today from that situation. And the district attorney in New York had called me while I was living in the South. And all of the other abusers I called, the one who was living upstairs from me, I was still in contact with her, called her. We all were going to come testify to keep him in prison. He's still in prison today.
So, going into your teenage years, you had effectively no father figure. You had a dysfunctional mother figure. You were trying to lead the family as best you could, having to skip school to do it. And the next thing you know, you start maturing, you get into puberty, and discover the same things that generations before had. You know, you're getting involved with men and they're abusing you, and you were pregnant at what, 14? Is that?
See, that is correct. That is absolutely right. I was scared to tell anyone that I was. And as I stated before, I just wish that I had told my grandmother at this time because when I was 14, pregnant, she probably could have helped me make a better decision. But at this time, I remember we were on Medicaid, where in New York, Medicaid was paying for abortions
Mhm.
right as we speak. And all I had to do was, I guess the clinic that I went to, they told me that if I just asked for the card and say I was for a checkup, that, they can make sure they make the arrangements for me, which as an adult, looking back at that time, I would wish that an organization would want to tell the parents or, call me as a parent and say, hey, something's going on with your daughter. But they helped me lie, to my guardian at home to get an abortion, which drives me right into why uh, I'm pro-life today because of a situation like that. I just wish that I never done that, but I told my grandmother, not knowing that at 14 she had a baby. I was unaware that my grandmother went through the same exact thing that I was going through, but she was raped. She was raped by her own father. So, that's where it's like a never ending cycle. I noticed this generational curses. And that wasn't the last time I was pregnant. Going on to my teenage years, I had a miscarriage. I went on to have another abortion. It was just, I was very promiscuous. I
You
was
might
very,
say.
very lost, very, very lost. And I realized that the statistics show that many young girls who are sexually abused, they do become very promiscuous and
Hmm.
a downward spiral. I was smoking marijuana. Never was on hard drugs, but I was smoking marijuana heavily. Even indulge into some things that you wouldn't want a young girl to really be in the areas, clubs, and at young age, men who knew that I was young and still didn't care. It was just the worst time of my life when I look back at it because these are those were predators, and there are men like that out here.
You were basically robbed of your teenage years. Do you have any positive memories during those years?
The only positive memories that I do remember is being in the care of my aunt who taught us how to be respectful. I remember back then you couldn't even, but she wouldn't allow us to say the word shut up. We had to say hush your mouth. And she raised us with manners. Those little things I do remember. I don't remember too many birthdays. Um, I remember just being a kid playing. The greatest times of my life is when I went to school. The teachers were remarkable. Those were the best times of my life is when I went to school and was loved by some of my teachers.
Somehow, this girl that grew up the way you just described turns into a loving mother, loving wife, great marriage, conservative, Republican, pro lifer, Christian. What happened?
Well, it's funny you asked that. So throughout my journey, going through life, I would travel to different states. I would go see family. My cousin was in the military in the Navy in San Diego. And so he was opening up an internet cafe and wanted me to go and visit him. I was at this time going to school in Georgia for paralegal studies, and he asked me to come to California. And I started to understand how the family life was, and just watching people around me, how families live their lives. And
You go to
my,
California to see a normal family. That's an irony.
I know, right? In fact, San Diego is beautiful. It's a beautiful place. Just have liberals destroying it, but I mean, it's a gorgeous place. But back in San Diego, my cousin was transferred over to Virginia, which led me back to the South. And so during my move back to Georgia, I came to visit my girlfriend in Alabama. And during my trip to Alabama, I had met my husband at a local Walmart here in the city that I live now. And so that was all she wrote. When I met my husband at the Walmart, I stayed here in Alabama. And so during my time in Alabama, I found out that my husband was a man of God. I never knew what that picture looked like, but he was a man of God. And he was going through divorce at the time. And so I helped him as a paralegal. I was helping him with that process. He asked me for my help, some information, help him out. And so uh, throughout that process, I realized through his divorce that he went through a very traumatizing divorce, and he was still very loving, kind to his wife, and I couldn't understand what that was about. And so I noticed that many other divorces that I watched, because we never grew up with a father figure in the house or anything like that, but I seen some crazy divorces. So you see it play out on TV, and you have friends and families are divorced, and they're always sad. This one, my husband is very, very good to his soon to be ex-wife, and I just didn't understand it. I asked him that, you know, that's the way the Lord would want me to handle that. That's the way the Lord would want me to do it. And so, he started to show these things to me scripturally of how he was supposed to still love her even through this divorce. And that just set the tone for me on how I wanted to know that kind of Jesus that my husband was talking about.
Hmm.
I mean, it was the sweetest thing. And so it helped me understand life a little better and helped me kind of how restructure my heart a bit throughout this time. So I started going to church with him and I rededicated my life to the Lord during this time. He had his divorce. We were actually dating and he proposed to me 6 months into our relationship. 6 months later, we were married and we were pregnant right thereafter. And so while I was I think I was doing my internship as a paralegal, and he told me that if I wanted to stay home and raise the children, that I can. I came in with 2 children. He came in with 4. And so we have 8 children together, but I was pregnant with our now 7th
7.
child. Um, and so he was saying that, showing me again, scripturally, biblically, how God is the head, God is over the household, He's the head, then the mom takes care of the children. So I started to see the way how the family structure was originally supposed to be. I fought it, I didn't understand it. I'm just a newbie in this thing, but I understood. But he told me I can stay home. And through this process, the Lord was actually working on my heart and working within me and helping me to understand that, hey, you're going to be able to pour into your children what was never given to you. And so, through being a stay-at-home mom, the Lord told me I was going to home educate my children. This was right around the time I think you and I had met during the Common Core, when Common Core hit the scene. And I was trying to understand Common Core, but then the Lord said, look, now that you know what's going on, pull them out. And I began to homeschool. Well, through the homeschooling process, I realized that I was the one truly getting the education. I was the one over the years. I realized that going through some of these books that the education, the curriculum we were using were it's called classical conversation. And it basically started us off in America, with our country, our nation, which was America. And so my children was learning all the trails, all the mountains, every state, every capital, everything known in America, in their country, that I had no clue what was in this country. And so through this study, every week, I realized how beautiful my country was. And I realized in that moment that I was a hater of my own country, and it
You
broke
actually
me.
voted
And
for Obama, didn't you?
I voted for Obama the first time. I was a staunch Democrat, okay? And I was a racist. I didn't like white folks based on what was told to me growing up. Um, I voted for Obama the first time, but around the second time Obama ran, that's when I began to become more involved in
Right.
uh, Christian walk. And so
I think he
the
coined
second,
the phrase elections have consequences. I'm going to coin the phrase facts have consequences.
real,
You saw the facts. Tammy, we're running out of time. Let me try to wrap up with an important point. You've been through substance abuse. You've been through neglect. You've been through fatherlessness. You've been through sexual abuse. You've been through most everything that one could be sent through. And if somebody's listening or watching this and say, "Well, she just doesn't know my situation," what would you say?
I would say continue to press on and to really get to fall in love with Jesus, literally understand how to build a relationship. It wasn't about religion. I grew up in religion and which is the Catholic Church. And so I realized it wasn't about religion. It was about a relationship, a real relationship with the Lord, a one-on-one relationship where I realized that how he loved me, he took me right where I was at and literally shaped and molded me from that point and literally started to remove the veil. So I say to that person, just continue to press on. Find you a good word church and get, faith come by hearing and hearing the word, hearing and hearing the word. So you got to hear the word constantly feeding your spirit. And that's really what transformed me, is to find you a decent church, a good church, and just fall madly in love with Jesus.
Tammy, it worked for you. There's no problem too big for God. There's no sin that will take you so far from God that His hand isn't right there if you'll just reach up and grab it. Tammy, you are an incredible story of strength, an incredible story of survival, an incredible story of faith. And we appreciate you sharing it. I hope, and I know that you do, because you've said it, it's in your testimony, that somebody hearing this will be impacted in a positive way, because there's a lot of people going through a lot of hell out there. And you are living proof that God is bigger.
I am in agreement, and you are exactly right.
Tammy, thanks for sharing. I know sometimes that gets hard. Thanks for sharing your story.
It does. Thank you so much for having me. I look forward to coming back on your show soon, Mark.
Let's do it again sometime. Thank you, Tammy.
You be blessed, my brother.
Oh, folks, what a powerful story. This is what I love. I live for this. PJNet is a platform where people can share their walk with Christ. It's that simple. And I think there are more stories out there. I am continuing to seek others who will share their story. Let me give you a brief update. At 9:30 exactly, we have scheduled the pre-recorded session with Dale Didway to just start streaming. It will happen automatically, and I'll be monitoring that, and whatever's going on in the chat room, I will just interrupt it with Dale Didway. That'll be at the bottom of the hour. Real quick, my carpenter is coming in Thursday to work on the studio a little bit, get everything spiffed up and customized, expanded, better, bigger, and more portable, so that we can take this whole thing up to Ohio the first week of November. So let me cut out of here for a few minutes, and we'll be back at the bottom of the hour as PJNet Live continues.